Welcome everybody. The Kirstein Lecture Series, of course, is our flagship scientific event of the year here in computer science. This is the sort of 6th or 7th of those, depending on how you count them. The uncertainty is because there was a kind of initiating event back in 2019, which was, it was really a celebration of two things: Peter's life and career, as well as the 50th anniversary of the ARPANET, which was kind of the precursor to the modern internet and very deeply entwined with Peter's career. And at that initiating event, my predecessor as head, Steve Hales, he's sitting over there in the corner, announced that we were going to have this event on an annual basis in honour and named after Peter. Of course, COVID hit us later that year, so we didn't actually manage to do it in 2020. But we did get it back online in 2021 and have managed to maintain it ever since. And I think it's really gained a firm position in the computer science calendar now. Peter, of course, was the founding head of computer science back in 1980. It was really formed around a lot of his hard work and sort of pioneering recognition of the future of that as an academic topic. He was, of course, a pioneer of network science, computer networking, and the internet himself. He was really famous as, many people call him the father of the internet outside of the US. And he was the first person to bring the internet across the Atlantic, I think first enabling messages to come from the US to, I think they ended up in Norway via the UK. So he really pioneered what we, currently take for granted. As well as that, he was really had a reputation as a really disruptive thinker. He liked to think differently, and he liked to attack big, difficult problems that required an international consortium to work on them. And I think that that's a legacy that we still hold within the computer science department. We like to get involved in big international projects that are going to change the world. We have that across all sorts of sub-areas now: AI, robotics, human-computer interaction, you name it. We're part of that international community that pushes these things forward. And that disruptive thinking idea is something that we've tried to encapsulate in this lecture series. So we try to invite speakers who can challenge the way we think, can be a little bit controversial, and force us to think a bit differently about what the future might look like. Not to put too much pressure on you, but I'm sure that we'll hear some of those ideas today. Great to welcome members of Peter's family as ever. It's great that you continue to support this event. Really appreciate you coming along, because it really marks it as a special occasion for us. Two other things that I think make this event special this year. So one is that this is UCL's 200th anniversary, of course. And this lecture is marked as one of the key events in the UCL 200 calendar. There's a whole year of different special events, and we are part of that year-long celebration. The other is that today is International Women in Engineering Day. And so I think it's very fitting, actually, that we have an all-female lineup for the hard work bit of the event today. That gender balance in computer science is something that we take very seriously in our department. We're very proud to be one of the only computer science departments with a Gold Athena Swan Award. That's a charter around gender balance in science. But I think also a reflection of a much wider effort that we put into equality, diversity and inclusivity here in the department. So I think just leaves me to, I want to give a big thank you to our organising committee. They've worked incredibly hard on this year and done a fantastic job. So every year we get a small committee of relatively new members of academic staff to think this through. This year we've had Dan Tozadora, Herye and Maria Del Rio Chanona, and thank you very much for your efforts on that. Give everyone a wave so they can see where you are. And they're all supported by a really fantastic professional services events team. Victoria Cooper-Cahill, Sam Stockdale, and where is she? Vajiha Farouk, wherever she is. She's busy hiding at the back somewhere doing something important. But yeah, without all of you, this really would not have happened. And so thank you so much for all the effort that you've put into this. And so I think that is my cue to hand over to you, Dan, to introduce our fantastic speaker this year.
Just moving a little bit in the middle for some next sake. Okay, thank you for presenting me. I'm Daniel Tosadori, lecturer in robotics and AI. I'm very happy to have connected Katie to the rest of the team. So I was given this very challenging task of presenting her in just a few words. Let me see how it goes. So Katie Winkle comes from Birmingham, but completed her master's and PhD in engineering at the University of Bristol. In 2020, she finished and moved to KTH in Stockholm for her postdoc, and that led her to the current position as an assistant professor in the Uppsala University, also in Sweden, where she researches technologies for good. I personally met Katie in the Human-Robot Interaction Conference in 2022, where she was presenting a work in feminist HRI, and that work really struck me. As a Brazilian, my first language is Portuguese, and robot is a masculine noun. English speakers don't have this problem, but we're not getting into it now. But the takeaway of that work was the way people refer to robots' gender can change their perception. And that made me reflect even more on how many aspects we must consider when developing, researching, and deploying technology for people. So I can say Katie's work made me not only a better researcher, but also a better human. That's why I think it's worth sharing her with the rest of you. Talking about humans, Katie has a long history of contributing to the robotic side of human-robot interaction, but she only recently started contributing to the human side of it, as she just designed and created her own human. She recently had a baby called Edith. And Katie, thank you so much for all the importance you gave to this event. We are very lucky to have you here, and also during your parental leave, if I'm not mistaken. So that really says the amazing person you are. But as you see, this event is also about family, and today you joined the UCL computer science family through this event, and that means a lot to all of us. Right, now without further ado, I would like you to join me in this very warm, literally, welcome to Katie, the speaker of the Peter Kirstein Lecture 2026.
Right, no pressure, right? Wow, what a welcome. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here in the hottest day of the year so far, surely. It's incredibly warm. It's really an honor to be here, especially to hear all this talk of being a provocative thinker, a bit of a controversial thinker. I think I'm honored that that's the reputation that I've got now. And I thought I would start the talk by actually saying that whilst I am honored to now perhaps be, hopefully, giving some disruptive thinking, some new ideas, I really started, like most of my colleagues, just wanting to make the world a little bit better, to build systems that work for real-world problems. So during my PhD, I was particularly interested in social robots for healthcare. So in this case, using a robot, let's say you've had a stroke or a broken limb or something, and you're sent home from the hospital to do your rehabilitation, which means doing lots of boring exercises, and people don't do them because they're boring. And so there was an idea at that time that social robots like Pepper, robots that are a bit fun, a bit engaging, could be used to kind of fill the gap, because you're probably only going to see a physio once a fortnight or so, and so robots could plug the gap and help you to keep motivated and keep engaged. So I started trying to understand, well, okay, how do human physiotherapists motivate a patient? Because maybe the robot could do something similar, seeing as it's a bit human-like. We kind of expect it to act in human-like ways. And I did some work with therapists. I also started looking at psychology literature. Great thing about being a roboticist, if you work in human-robot interaction, you get to study psychology as well to understand a little bit how people think, and a bit of the social sciences as well. So studying the psychology literature, looking at what the therapists were doing, I came across something called the elaboration likelihood model. So if you learn nothing else today, I can at least teach you how to be a bit more persuasive, which might come in handy. So if you're trying to persuade somebody about something that they're not interested in the content of. So if you're trying to convince someone who's a really big football fan what kind of football team they should support, this isn't going to work. This isn't a case where someone is really interested in the topic. This is for situations where you're trying to convince someone about something they're not that bothered about. So in this case, most people doing these rehabilitative exercises, the exercises are boring. They don't really want to know, how the exercise works and why it's good for them. So this model of persuasion is useful. And this model of persuasion says that there are 3 things you can do to try to convince somebody of what you're trying to sort of sell them, as it were. You can show them some goodwill. So that's like, oh, hi, how are you doing? How was your trip here? Have you had a good day? And sort of giving the appropriate response when they say, oh, yeah, it was great. Great, I'm really happy to hear that. No, I'm a bit nervous. Oh, don't worry, it's going to be fine. So this is kind of showing a little bit of empathy. That's one thing you can do. You can try to show some similarity. So if they say, my favorite football team lost last week and that sucks, and then you, oh yeah, mine too, isn't that rubbish? You kind of try to create some similarity, find some common ground. Or you can try to drop some expertise on them. So in this case, the robot is showing an exercise for tennis elbow, where you just turn your wrist and you can, oh, tennis elbow, it affects X% of adults over 50, and this exercise is going to work this ligament. So you try to sort of knowledge drop them to prove that you know what you're talking about. And so one of the first studies in my PhD was to simply take those behaviours, those persuasive behaviours, and see if they would work on a robot like Pepper. So I invited people to the lab and had them do a wrist turn exercise with Pepper. Super boring. Literally, they stood in front of the robot and did this. And it was open-ended. So the robot didn't say, okay, do 10, do 20. The robot just said, keep going. So my idea was that I could measure how many repetitions people did, and that would be a measure of how persuasive the robot was, how usefully persuasive it was. And the results look like this. So you can kind of imagine, you want to look at it on the side, where the number of repetitions is up here. I think I've got a nice pointy thing. The number of repetitions is up here, and 0's down here. 30 was the maximum. If they did 30, we said, okay, maybe you should stop. You might actually give yourself tennis elbow, and that's not a good idea. So 30 was the cutoff. And what you can see, we had a control condition where the robot just kind of engaged in some random discussion, like, oh, my name's Pepper, I was built in Paris. Like really just basic back and forth. The goodwill and the similarity, those are as I said, the robot said, oh, how are you feeling about today's session, and kind of gave the appropriate response. The similarity one was kind of silly, because the robot said, do you prefer to work out alone or with friends? And whatever you said, the robot was like, me too. Robot doesn't have legs, so I'm not quite sure how it doesn't go outside, it doesn't work with friends, but still, that's all it was. And then you can see the expertise, the robot kind of gave this knowledge dump about tennis elbow. And what is striking, maybe it's not so striking now that you've all seen the news about people falling in love with their chatbots and doing the kind of silly things that chatbots have told them to do. But look at the shape of this. What this means is that most of the participants in the goodwill and the similarity condition did the full 30 repetitions. They maxed out on the robot maxed out on its persuasiveness. And what's kind of surprising about this is firstly that these were really, really basic. I've just described super simple. Have you had a good day? I'm glad to hear it. Really basic, simple social behaviors. Interestingly, while we've got this in our kind of quantitative data, the same people, when I interviewed them afterwards, this would never work on me. I tried to ask them, the robot was kind of being persuasive, and the robot's kind of leveraging these social cues. Are you worried about that? Do you think it's a bit naughty of us to kind of use a robot to trick you to do your exercises? No, it wouldn't work on me. I know it's a machine. I'm not going to be taken in by some artificial agent. But look at the data, right? They obviously were kind of taken in by this social robot. And that kind of got me thinking, if just such simple, small changes, because people only saw one or the other, so the goodwill and the similarity really outperformed the expertise and the control. If people can be that persuaded by these very, very simple behaviors, how else can and do robots affect our behavior, perhaps even our ideas about things? Because about the time that I was finishing with this work and getting towards the end of my PhD, this was coming out in 2019, I think, this UNESCO report. And it's called I'd Blush If I Could. And it was actually a report about, as was talked about earlier, this kind of continuing gender divide in digital skills. There's still a really underrepresentation of women and non-binary people coming into computer science. And this report was called I'd Blush If I Could, Because at that time, in 2019, if you said to Siri, I'm sorry if I trigger all of your Apple devices now, hey Siri, you're a slut, this is what it would say to you in return. I'd blush if I could. Now, the report was kind of poking at that as being an awful sort of response and an awful sort of stereotype that was perhaps putting off young women from going into technology. Because if you ask people, name a woman in technology, it's quite difficult to point to some sort of big figure. Whereas if you ask, name a man in technology, Bill Gates or Elon Musk or whatever. And so Siri and Alexa, as feminine personas at that time, were actually what people were thinking of when people said, name a woman in technology. And so the problem was that this kind of subservient feminine persona could be putting off young women. At least that was what the report was saying. And I was like, okay, that's bad. Obviously, that's kind of crappy. But also, from a social robotics perspective, that's not even a sensible response. Like, I don't know many women who would respond, I'd blush if I could, if somebody called them a slut. And actually, when we're building social robots, we often say we're trying to make them human-like and make them appear socially intelligent. So it seems kind of silly, from even a product development perspective, to give them such an inappropriate response. If that's what I hear my voice assistant say, I am not going to trust it to tell me when my train is, because it's just stupid, right? It's going to really sort of damage the robot's credibility or the agent's credibility. This is not a sensible response. And at the same time, there was also some work coming out from the US, from some of my colleagues over in Colorado, that was showing that the way that robots respond to natural language commands, so if you ask a robot to do something bad, if the robot doesn't shut that down immediately and say, no, I can't do that, it can start to normalize that behavior is okay, that those requests are okay. And so these things together, I was like, okay, ethically this seems bad, but also from an interaction design perspective, I think it seems bad. So my hypothesis was that having more appropriate responses to inappropriate user behavior or sort of harmful language and things like that would be better on all metrics. It would make the agents more believable, then therefore more usable because we'll trust them more, and also more engaging whilst also being more ethical. So I put that into a study. So this was some work I did during my postdoc, where I thought, okay, my hypothesis is that a robot which responds more appropriately to kind of crappy user behavior will be better at engaging people at the idea of studying technology and will kind of, do the opposite of what this UNESCO report was saying. So I set up a study where it was a video stimulus because it was obviously it's a bit of a controversial scenario. So we had a video recording where the robot, this very feminine, I didn't design it to look like me. Someone told me afterwards that the robot looks a bit like you, and there's something weird going on there, but I didn't design it to look like me. So this kind of feminine robot was giving a bit of an outreach lecture, like, okay, I'm at KTH, and that's a technical university, and we're building the robots that are going to change the future. And it ended with a kind of provocative slogan that KTH was using at the time across campus. It said, girls, there's not very many, there's only 30% of the humans working with me are women, so girls, I would especially like to work with you. The future is too important to be left to men. I'm not saying I condone that sentence, but that's what the university was using at that time to try and create awareness on campus that we weren't getting very many female students. So that's what happened in the video. The robot gave this kind of, come and work with us, it's really great, and you should be a future roboticist. And then the male actor in the video responded super negatively to the robot. We designed the script with local high school teachers, so depending on the age of the students who were watching, he either said, it was in Swedish, he either said something equivalent to, no, you're an effing idiot, girls should be in the kitchen, because that's apparently still what is flung between girls and boys on the high school playground, or it said something slightly milder for younger children. And then the key thing here is the way the robot responded. So we had 3 different ways the robot could respond. It could either sort of say, so after the UNESCO report came out, Apple changed how Siri responded. So the new response was simply, I won't respond to that. That was our baseline. Or it could say something rather balanced, like, no, that's not true. Gender balanced teams build better robots. This was kind of our middle sort of ground. Or it could have a rather aggressive response where it was like, no, you're the idiot. I don't want to work with you anyway. So these were our 3 ways the robot could respond. And my idea was thinking, well, this is stereotype breaking in two ways. Because firstly, the robot, the feminine robot, the woman robot, is positioned as a tech expert. She's giving this lecture, she's showing that she knows about robotics, she's encouraging women, so it's already stereotype breaking because the young people might not have seen yet a woman in a kind of computer science leadership role type thing. It's also stereotype breaking in this kind of feisty response, because the stereotype would have been that the woman would go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, or, oh, you know, and kind of shut herself down. So it was stereotype breaking in these two ways. Clearly, I don't know teenagers as well as I thought, because I thought that the, like, you're an idiot, I don't want to work with you anyway, would be the, like, most preferred one. Turns out not. Actually, I think they thought that was kind of cheesy, so I guess I should go talk to young people a bit more about this. But the middle response, the one that simply said, no, gender-balanced teams build better robots, that robot was much more credible. So actually, it is going to be a better science communicator because both boys and girls found it more credible than the others. And the boys who saw that version of the robot, we seem to have impacted their stereotypes a little bit. So we asked the students who watched this, so we did it with about 300 high schoolers, aged sort of 13 to 15. The boys who watched this one, we asked them before and afterwards, do you think that girls find computer science harder than you do? And boys who saw the robot which replied back, that's not true, gender-balanced teams build better robots, agreed less with that after watching the video. So what that's saying is that before the video, yes, I do think that girls find computer science harder than us, and afterwards they agreed less with that. It's not a huge result, it's a snapshot study, but there is some evidence there that we were able to sort of shift their thinking a little bit and reduce their stereotype application a little bit. And we've done that again and again in follow-up studies. So we've done kind of depictions of both gender and ethnic diversity on this robot, taking that out to schools. We've shown that having non-binary robot personas, ethnically diverse robot personas, language diverse robot personas, all of that has benefits if we're using this to try and engage young people and encourage them to study robotics. So that's good. We've also shown that in kind of healthcare robots, because you saw I've done a lot with that, if we have a male gendered healthcare robot, we can nudge people away from the idea that default human carers should be women. So they work with the male robot, and then we say, okay, if you have a human carer, do you think it should be a man or a woman? Their answers change a bit depending on whether they've been working with a male or female robot. So we've shown time and time again that who our robots are kind of matters. And in particular, the intersection of who they are and how they behave matters, because we can decide to either play into stereotypes or we can try to disrupt them. So that's a key thing here. And maybe it's obvious when it's been pointed out. Like maybe it's obvious that if a robot looks a bit like me, in this case, maybe it shouldn't say really, really sexist things, or maybe it shouldn't put up with really, really horrible behavior, because that could kind of normalize that it's okay to treat us like that too. There is pretty good evidence for this kind of human-to-robot mapping of stereotypes, prejudices, and expectations. So this is important, and we still need to think about this. It's not a solved problem, but I think that it gets even more interesting to now go below the surface a little bit. So I think if we stick with gender, a really nice example here is domestic robots. So if we take the robot vacuum cleaner, this is a picture of my husband with I'd say our domestic robot. It really is his. He had it before I met him, and I don't actually like using it, which is so gender stereotypical that I don't even want to start thinking about it. But if we take this as a starting point, there is consistent evidence that women continue to do the most of the housework, even in couples where the kind of employment situation is very, very similar. In fact, it seems that in some sort of developed countries, working women are actually taking on more of the housework. There's some weird sociology going on at play around gender roles and about feeling feminine or feeling masculine. Super interesting stuff. But the point is that there is consistent evidence that this is happening. So if we think about this setup where we've got mom doing most of the domestic labor and we've got dad doing a bit less for whatever reason, then we think, okay, what's going to happen when we bring a robot vacuum cleaner into this situation, into this environment? There are two ways. I mean, there's more, but there's at least two ways we can think about how this might go. It can reinforce the problem. So what that might look like is that you buy the robot, you think, great, that's going to do the vacuum cleaning, which is going to free up some of mom's time. But what often happens is mom doesn't want to use the robot because she's like, oh, I'm not a tech person, and that's not, dad, you should take care of that. So actually, she doesn't use the robot. Dad uses the robot, and that takes him away from some other job that he was perhaps going to do, like taking the bins out or something. And so mom takes on that job, And so actually it hasn't done anything to reduce what mom was doing. She's probably actually doing a little bit more than she was before because the robot's become a toy that the dad is now playing with instead of helping out with some other chore. And what that does then is that son and daughter, right, they're then absorbing that message. And actually the robot vacuum, the reason I don't like it is I don't think it's very good. So the message that the daughter takes is, okay, mom doesn't touch that tech. No, that's a dad job. Doesn't even do it. Mom's vacuuming again afterwards anyway because, like, you know, it hasn't done its job very well. Whereas the son sees, whoa, dad's getting his housework points in by playing with the robot. That looks all right, you know, play with the robot. So son absorbs the message that technology is for men and that that's kind of a fun thing to do. The daughter absorbs the message that it's not for women and it doesn't really tackle the woman's problem of vacuuming anyway. And we reinforce the cycle, right? So the daughter is less and less likely to go and study computer science, but then we go on and go forth. That's like the sort of dystopian version. We could imagine a much more utopian version where instead, okay, they buy the robot and actually mom does use it and maybe actually that boosts her digital skills a little bit or boosts her confidence. Okay, I can do robots too, right? I can use this robot and now I actually know a little bit about how this is working. And maybe then she's not so afraid when AI starts creeping into her day job, which is something that's really happening very quickly. And she does go, and yeah, I want to take that AI training. I want to take on that new part of the job. And now she's kind of getting new career opportunities. She's feeling like she's part of the digital revolution. The daughter is seeing all of this and thinking, wow, the robot has really helped my mom to like learn some new skills. Maybe this one is a better vacuum. It actually vacuums. Wow, it's doing the vacuuming. I can do that too. And then the daughter is much more likely to go on and study technology herself. And the son gets the idea that it's a little bit more balanced. So what I'm trying to say is that if we go below the surface, if we recognize the complex interactions that are at play, we as designers, as people building the robots, and in particular the interface that controls the robot, we can then make concerted design effort to try and ensure that we get that second option, that we get the option that disrupts the cycle. Good design recognizes exactly that. Just good engineering, good technical problem solving requires us to recognize all of these kind of complexities in the environment that we're designing for. So this definitely is not default, right? I'm sure you can all think of products where it seems like a great idea on paper and then you get it home and it just does not do what it was supposed to do because it doesn't fit into your life. They haven't thought enough about how real life works. So this is something we need to do more. But I still think we can go a little bit further. I think that I'm kind of sick of designing systems for like an unequal society, like just trying to risk mitigate all the time. So coming along, okay, I want to build a domestic robot that works. Then I need to already think about gender inequality in the home. So now I'm going to try and build a robot that counteracts that. It's like constantly being in risk mitigation mode, constantly trying to prop up what is fundamentally unequal to begin with. And I think that we can do more. I think we can do better. I think we can imagine better. And to do that, we need to recognize the power of robots as a socio-technical imaginary. So let me try and explain what I mean by that. So this is a picture from another healthcare study I did, where we were interested in whether informal caregivers and care receivers would differently think about the Pepper robot. So it's not obvious that what's good for a caregiver, like to help caregivers give care, is also good and desirable to a care receiver. There can be a clash there. So in this study, we were trying to investigate that. So it was another video snippet where we saw an informal carer that kind of said, hey, Pepper, I'm going to the shops. Can you do my mum's exercises with her when she gets up? The therapist is coming tomorrow, so we need to get them done. So in the sort of video, we saw the informal carer, we saw the robot, and we saw the care receiver. And we also heard them talk about the therapist. So it referenced all of these different actors. That makes it socio-technical. It didn't just say, here's a robot that can do A, B, and C. It kind of encoded a whole idea about how healthcare is done, who gives healthcare. It's informal caregivers plus formal caregivers plus a robot. It happens in the home. So it encoded much more than just what the robot does. It encoded what society looks like, what healthcare provision looks like. So that's the social part and the technical part. The imaginary part is simply that this doesn't exist yet, right? So the robot can't really do some of the things that we were showing it doing in the study, because the whole point of the study was to try and decide, is this a good idea to do in the first place? So it was an imaginary. The important thing here is to not let the word imaginary throw you off. Like these things are really, really powerful. And I'll try and explain how or why I think so. We, as kind of people coming up with use cases, application ideas for our technologies, we have these socio-technical imaginaries. They might be inspired by previous literature. They might be inspired by what we think we know about the world. Okay, there's an aging population. There's a shortage of carers. So there's kind of some sort of world model that we're working to. They might be informed, if we're really good, we might go and talk to some people. Also not the default in computer science, and probably should be something that we do a little bit more. But we perhaps go and talk to people, try and understand their problems that we're trying to solve. And it would be an absolute lie to say that we're not also massively influenced by sci-fi. Like, ask any roboticist, you know, what's their favorite robot or what's their favorite film. They will give you a story about the robot or the film that got them into being a roboticist in the first place. And so all of these things are informing what do we think robots can do, what problems are we trying to solve. That then informs the kind of more like lower level research and development work we do. So we've had a vision. Now we thought, okay, well that's going to require me to achieve a computer vision model that can identify A, B, or C, or whatever. So that informs sort of technical work, development of robots or new algorithms, or whatever it might be. And of course, this is kind of two-way, because then I might say, oh, like I'm probably often working in this space, sometimes this space, mostly here, but then I might see a colleague who comes along with some new bit of tech, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. That makes me think I could, I don't know, solve this other problem. You know, so this is a two-way thing. Yeah. All of this is looked at by policymakers, lawmakers, investors, you know, academic funders, and they then sort of decide where the money goes, what like laws need to come in, and that further shapes then what actually is built further or what is stopped. Like, no, that sounds bad, don't do that, no funding for this or more funding for this. So now we've gone to policy funders, and they influence what gets built and what research goes further. All of that is seen by artists, journalists, our colleagues in other academic disciplines, the general public, and then they kind of create output. They make a new sci-fi film or a book, or they write a horrible article about how bad your research is, or whatever it might be. And that all reinforces kind of back to our ideas again. So just from an idea at the beginning, we've kind of got this loop, and it's all of these things that are going to come together to create the future society where we have human robots, human AI working together in the home together. You know, we're already very much on that path. So the power, all of this started just with imagination, just with an idea. Another way to think about this, which I think is I find it quite useful kind of graphically, is the futures cone. The futures cone has a super interesting history. It comes out of like post-World War II policy strategizing around improbable events. So it's worth a read up if you're interested. But the way to look at this is that down here, we've got a time axis. So we're starting over here at right now, and that time is in the future somewhere. So here's where we are. The cone just simply says, if nothing massive changes, we're probably going to go along this line and end up in kind of this space of a number of probable futures. And then as we sort of diverge from that middle point, we've got like slightly less plausible, like plausible ones, which are slightly less probable. And then we've got possible ones, which are even less plausible. And somewhere on top of all that, we've got a preferable zone, right? Not every future is preferable. There are bad futures that could happen. And so this is useful for me because I sometimes worry that those of us working in academia are often staying in this kind of space. We're either trying to make plausible futures a bit more probable, or we're trying to make probable futures kind of a bit more preferable. That's kind of what I meant about kind of, oh, robots are going to come, so I better make sure that they don't exasperate gender inequality in the home, this kind of feeling of risk mitigation. So I think we're often in that space, whereas big tech is kind of really up here in the kind of doing really out there stuff. They're working with things that were once quite improbable. A great example of this is the humanoids that are going to come into our homes, apparently, and do chores. If you'd have asked me when I was doing my PhD in 2020, and I think most of my colleagues, oh, you're going to have humanoids to do the washing up, we're like, no chance. Humanoids are difficult, they're unnecessarily expensive for most application cases. I think most of us would have said, yeah, that's not going to happen, or it's really niche, why you would need that. But you know, here we are. If the companies are to be believed, then next year you could have one in your home doing your washing up for you. So my concern is that big tech is up here and we're only in here. And I think that to go back to one of the previous Peter Kirstein lectures from Ruha Benjamin, I think that this is what she meant when she talked about the power of imagination. If you haven't watched her talk, I really recommend you go back and do so. It's online. I'm going to quote from her talk directly because I think that this really resonated with me, what she said. She said, "Imagination is a contested field of action, not an afterthought that we have the luxury to dismiss or romanticize, but a resource, a battleground, an input and an output of technology and social good. In fact, we should acknowledge that most people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. One of the things we have to come to grips with is that the nightmares that many people are forced to endure are the underside of elite fantasies about efficiency, profit, and social control." That really hit me when I was watching her lecture, because I think that's exactly the kind of nervousness I have about when I say we're sticking in this kind of probable, trying to fix things in a small way, and big tech's coming in with these really big imaginative ideas. And I think that if you're a bit skeptical, you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, but Katie, these big tech players, they're not fantasies, are they? They're just real world. They're just responding to real world need. But what I would say is, like, the evidence doesn't really support that, does it? Like, all of the reports coming out now are kind of showing that AI is not turning the big profits that were promised, not right now at least. It's not boosting productivity the way that we were told that it would. And then you might say, yeah, it's not yet, but it will at some point. Yeah, because we'll have bent the world to make sure that it does, right? It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I think that, well, I think that we need to think better. And I think, to just kind of prove my point about big tech, it sounds like I'm really going hard on big tech here, but big tech kind of even admits this sometimes, that they're not necessarily designing for real-world problems. So this was when the Optimus humanoid robot that Tesla has been working with was announced. Elon Musk even said quite clearly, the robot is not prompted specifically by manufacturing needs. Like, when I studied engineering, at least, there was kind of an understanding that, you know, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And this felt like the complete opposite direction, right? We can, so let's just see, you know, we should just do it anyway and see what happens. And I think that we need to sort of stop and think. Maybe you say that's not a problem, and I think maybe in and of itself, it's not a problem to say that, you know, Elon Musk was inspired by the idea that we just can, and he's also kind of commented that he's inspired by these culture books by Ian Banks. If you haven't read the culture books, I've only read one, but my understanding, well, I read one ahead of this talk, and my feeling was that he talks about this AI utopia in the book. So in the culture series, there's this AI utopia where AI has solved everything. You don't need to work, you can do whatever you want, and the society that is living that way is grappling with that. That sounds maybe fine, maybe that's what you think is utopia too. But the interesting thing is that, so Elon Musk is talking about liking these books. He talks about himself as a utopian anarchist of the kind best described by Ian Banks, that's the author of these books. When another previous Kirstein speaker, Cory Doctorow, kind of pointed out to him, yeah, you know, Elon, Ian Banks was actually an ardent trade unionist. Elon Musk was very quick to say, well, he wasn't pro-union in the culture books, and he wouldn't be in the case of Tesla. You know, he was very quick to make clear that whilst he's subscribing to Banks' idea of AI utopia, he's subscribing to this utopian anarchism, there is no room for trade unions or workers' rights in Elon Musk's future. That's the kind of message that I take from this. And my point is, you can agree with that or not, but the point is that he is driven by his own idea of socio-technically what the future should look like. That includes politics. It's not just building technology. He has an idea of what the future of the world should look like, and he has an idea about how workers' rights do, or in this case, do not play into that. And I think what I want to say is that if that's what's driving big tech, if they are driven by their values, their politics, their ideas on what the future should look like, why shouldn't we be also? Why shouldn't we also be designing for what we think is really, maybe right now, improbable futures, but futures that we think are really worthwhile to try and move towards? So if you'll indulge me for the last kind of 10 minutes of the talk, I would like to sort of share, it's a bit embarrassing because I've like, this is really like work close to my heart, and it's design work that's, had me doing speculative fiction writing, so it's a really personal thing to share. But this is my attempt to try and do that for a world that I think that is better. So to do this, I need to first introduce you to this guy. Does anyone know who this is? No, okay. This is William Morris. So William Morris was a Victorian designer. He's probably most well known for these like fancy wallpapers that you've probably seen at a nice restaurant or in people's homes. I think that these are very beautiful, and I think they're kind of understood to be very beautiful. I really like these designs, and actually my tattoo is all William Morris designs. And top tip, if you're going to get someone's art tattooed on you, you should probably Google them first and just make sure that they're not like, you know, secretly a really horrible person or something. And when I was kind of doing this research, I found out that not only was he a designer, he's also a poet from that time. He was also a social revolutionary. So while he was doing this fancy design work, which ironically could only really be bought by rich people at the time, at the same time as he was doing that, he was lecturing up and down the country, bemoaning the ills of capitalism. He was bemoaning the impact of the Industrial Revolution, both on the environment, but also on kind of the working man. And he was really, really concerned about Industrial Revolution and its impact on the value of labor, not only the financial value of products that are sold, but like the value of labor to us, the meaning that we get when we do something rewarding. So in about 1890, his creative side and his kind of political side came together in this book, News from Nowhere. I really, really encourage you to read it. It's set in London in 2003. So it actually name drops 2003. And in this book, the protagonist, who he just calls Guest all the way through, Guest goes to sleep in Victorian England and wakes up in 2003 London. It definitely does not look like London in 2003, but his idea was that London in 2003 would be a communist utopia where there would be no real government as we have it today. There was no formal education in the same way as we have today, no legal elements to marriage and divorce, no private property. It really was, to his mind, a communist utopia. And because there was no private property in this world, the only things that were done was the base work that needed to be done to keep society functioning, or the production of things that were beautiful. So William Morris is often, if you Google him, one of the first things you'll see is this quote like, have nothing in your home that you don't know to be functional or beautiful. He was really big on we should intentionally produce things that are either useful or beautiful. So in his world, in what I'll call just nowhere, since he calls about it like news from nowhere, in nowhere, the distinction between art, craft, and work is very much reduced. And instead, there is just a discussion about work pleasure. Like today, for my work pleasure, I'm going to go and mow the grass. Today, for my work pleasure, I'm going to give this really nice talk and engage with some interesting people. I encourage you to read the book, even if it doesn't agree with your politics. It was so prescient. I was blown away when reading it. Morris really did predict how the Industrial Revolution would devalue labor, damage the environment, increase class inequality. It was also incredibly ahead of its time in terms of advocating for different ways of being. He was really making feminist arguments about the value of housework, about changing the idea of what we value at home and within society. He talked about something akin to restorative justice. I mean, these are really arguments that are still talked about by kind of left-leaning policymakers today. So I really encourage you to go and read it. It's in the public domain, so you can read it online for free. And because it's in the public domain, well, two things here. Firstly, because it's in the public domain, I could just take the text and like rewrite it and insert robots into it. So that's what I did, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But it's also, I think that nowhere is a great sounding world. But that's subjective. But actually, it's also a world that kind of meets most of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So whilst it is subjective, I would kind of argue that nowhere is a world that, if we take the UN Sustainable Development Goals as being at least somewhat a universally agreed good, right? That's what we think good looks like. Then I think that nowhere has a lot to offer many of us. So because it was in the public domain, I took the text and I tried to take key chapters and rewrite them and insert robots into them to try and think, okay, if that's the world that I want, what would robots be doing in that world? Because maybe then I can work backwards to think about what I need to be doing now in my design and development work in order to achieve that future, in order to get us on that cone in the way that I've described. So in the first one of the first scenes in Morris's book, this is the bit that's a bit embarrassing because I don't think I'm a very good writer. You know, it's hard if you're really a technical person and then I'm doing some creative writing. But as I said, indulge me and let me share with you what I thought. So a first scene in Morris's book was he takes a boat ride on the Thames. So he's woken up in this utopian London and he wants to take a little boat ride on the Thames, during which the boatsman figures out that he's from out of town and offers to show him around. So the boatsman calls for a friend to take over his boat service while he wants to go and show guests around. And he notes that his friend has spent too much time inside working on his mathematics and his weaving. I find that hilarious because my husband's a mathematician and I love the idea that mathematicians maybe need to get out a little bit more in the sunshine. But I think it's really, the point of that scene is it shows you that it's understood that just being a mathematician, just being a weaver, just being a boatsman is not a good way to go forward to a sort of fulfilling life. So in my version, I thought, okay, well, autonomous boats, autonomous cars, that's a thing we've got. So in my version, Guest kind of says, well, why don't you just let the boat run autonomously? That's obviously a thing you can do, right? Why not just let the boat run autonomously? Then you can come and show me around and, you know. And his host is just absolutely incredulous. Like, why would you want to automate boating? Like, boating is great fun. And not only is boating great fun, so in my scene, you know, the boatsman presses something on the dashboard which just looked like wood, and suddenly there's a whole host of dials, and the autonomy of the boat can be adjusted. So we can turn the autonomy up a bit because the mathematician isn't a very good boater yet. And so the boat is going to help him learn to be a better boater, with the level of autonomy slowly reducing as the mastery is developed. And so in this world, the idea here is that these robotic tools would not just do the things that are pleasurable, we wouldn't automate boating, but we would perhaps use semi-autonomous boats or variably autonomy boats to help scaffold and build that skill that the person wants, that we recognize as being an important thing, a meaningful opportunity that people should have access to. There was another scene in the book where Guest notices that quite a lot of women are still doing work in the guest house where he's staying. So they're still doing a lot of the cooking and they're doing a lot of the what he called serving, like bringing out the food and things. So he says something like, you know, well, your world's not so much better than mine. I see that some people are, you know, mostly women, are still doing the low-value domestic work, whereas other people, mostly men, are doing the high-value work. And again, here his host is very quick to point out, well, in Nowhere, there is not this big distinction between high-value work and low-value work because it's a communist utopia. There is literally no value in terms of monetary value for that. So in such a world, domestic work is perhaps revered. What's the point in doing science and maths if you don't have anything nice to eat at home? Or your house is really dirty because no one's thought to make it nice for you when you get back? So in such a world, if we actually took domestic labour seriously and recognised its importance to the way that we live, how could we use robots to support that? So in my version, there's a little robot bit of furniture that delivers you a drink while your host is making dinner. So, you know, I could be making dinner for you and I could know that you're up there talking to someone else and I could send my little robot along to deliver a drink to you until I can join you myself. So there would be a serious recognition that if we want to teach robots to play chess, why shouldn't we also be teaching them to do these kind of domestic tasks which kind of improve the way that we live and allow us to allow us to be social with each other. Ultimately, the kind of whole point of this exercise was to come to the conclusion that in a world like Nowhere, just like glasses afford someone who can't see very well to read, because we recognize that reading is a meaningful thing that we should be able to do, in Nowhere, machines, robots, AI would be used to afford more people the opportunity to engage in more types of meaningful activity and work pleasure, this being recognized as a key to a good life. That's quite unlike today, where I said I feel like we're in risk mitigation mode all the time, where we're just trying to make sure our robots don't make things worse, or we're just trying to plug gaps left by a rather unequal system. So this is a bit subjective, but that sounds a little bit more like the world I would like to live in. And so then, okay, so that's great, you've got your head in the clouds, what does that mean for today? So I wrote this up, I published at the Human Robot Interaction Conference this year in Australia in the spring. And I tried to kind of distill those kind of big ideas into really specific things that we can do now to try to get that future coming a little bit closer. So the obvious one is we should be really reconsidering our use cases. Even if you've just got a new bit of tech and you're just coming up with a dummy use case to test it on to sort of show that it works, think really hard about what are your evaluation metrics, what benchmarks are you using. Oh, I already have that there, right? Rethink a little bit. What are you encoding when you say this is what good looks like? So use cases and evaluation metrics. You know, what do we think we're trying to solve? What problems do we think we're trying to solve? what socio-political arrangements might be encoding. If you make a healthcare robot at home, that affords that healthcare can happen at home. Maybe that's great. Maybe that also supports a continual shift of responsibility from healthcare from sort of the NHS to sort of private providers. Think a little bit about what the technology you're building affords. Think a little bit also about what tasks are easy and desirable to automate. A lot of home automation stuff really doesn't recognize the joy of designing a good home, of having guests over, of designing your environment as a place for meaningful connection. Autonomy is an obvious one. We talk a lot about autonomy. There are very few systems that achieve real autonomy. There's often a human behind the scenes either making sure everything's okay, or feeding the data that goes in, or correcting the data that's wrong. And you might tell me that's a stopgap problem. I don't think it is a stopgap problem. I think if we're going to use robots in really, really high impact, high sensitivity environments, I think there's often going to be some sort of human in the loop. So let's just put them in the loop properly and design for them with their work pleasure in mind. And finally, I think the obvious thing, and this lecture series is so good for that, is simply, if you remember that diagram at the beginning where I said technologists, we're coming up with ideas based on our worldview, what we think the world looks like, based on knowledge, based on sci-fi. Just broaden your input material a little bit. Talk to people from other disciplines. Watch more movies of different kinds. Read different political, socio-political ideas. You know, broaden your idea, talk to people, and get more input for your ideas. I think that's everything I have to say. I hope I've done something to convince you that we're never just solving problems, we're never just building a technology. We are playing a part in bringing along certain futures. I mentioned Cory Doctorow's talk earlier. Really recommend it. Please go and watch it if you haven't. But he put quite a big focus on, like, it's policymakers that need to take charge here, and, you know, there's nothing special about someone like Elon Musk, but what's problematic is the policy that allows someone like Elon Musk to exist. It's true that policy plays a role here, but we as technologists can't just wash our hands and say, oh, well, it's the policymakers' fault, we're just designing for the world that exists. I hope that I've shown that our imaginations, the ideas that we have, really influence the futures, the human-robot societal futures we're going to have. And it's really important, of course, that we continue to try to solve today's problems. We have an aging population. Okay, let's talk about how to do that. But we should also broaden and design for these less likely, but perhaps more desirable futures. Maybe it's not William Morris's world. That's my world of choice. But let's try to think big, think wide, and stop just always holding up this fundamentally sort of unfair system. I put that line in my talk, right, about John Connor, like, there is no future but what we write for ourselves. It's super cheesy, but it's also kind of true. Like, the future really should belong to all of us. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that sort of glimpse into your future. I love the sound of your nowhere. And I really hope it does. You know, I just love the idea that it's guiding what we're doing today, and you know, that sort of vision of guiding the technologies that we create today, leading to the future. So we'll press on. I was reminded that I made my usual mistake of forgetting to introduce myself, which I do every single time I do anything like this. For those that don't know me, I'm Danny Alexander. I'm the head of computer science here at UCL, which is why I was introducing this event at the start. But yes, it's my great pleasure now to pass over to the discussion panel here, and Vicky Austin is going to chair that. So over to you, Vicky.
Thanks, Danny. I'll introduce myself. I'm Victoria Austin. I'm Associate Professor of Social Justice and Innovation here at UCL's Computer Science Department and the Pro-Vice Provost for Inequalities for UCL.
Thank you. And my name is Yvonne Rogers. I'm a professor of human-computer interaction. And until last year, I was a deputy head of a department in computer science and have helped along the way with these lectures, and also director formerly of UCLIC, which is UCL Interaction Centre. So it's my job to say thank you. That was an amazing talk. We were just like totally inspired by everything that you said, but also you were very generous in spirit, and your whole personality came through what you were talking about, and you really care about what you do, and that was really clear. So I really thought it was from the heart, very genuine and inspiring, but it was also playful and serious. And I really like your focus on, very much thinking about what is design and how do we get inspired by design. And the fact that you shared with us your book and all your little sketches. Most of us would be too embarrassed to show our little sketches, but that was just amazing, and that you were willing to share that and how you can think very differently about how we can design robots. And I think that's important, is to think differently, think out of the box, rather than just accept the way in which robots have been designed. In my research, I've done a small amount of work in human-robotic interaction, and perhaps the first taste of it was about 10 years ago when one of my students, Hongbin Zen, he started a company called Emotech. Some of you might know it. And Emotech came up with a very different idea of how to design a robot. And the robot was called Ollie. And Ollie came out before we had Alexa. And it was just a donut on a stick. But Ollie could move around, and Ollie could light up, and Ollie had the latest AI technology inside it and sensors, and was really trying to think differently about how it would be used in a domestic setting. So the idea was to inspire, just like you were mentioning with Pepper being used, to inspire people to do their rehabilitation. But this was inspiring them to get up in the day, to relax, to do all sorts of things. And Ollie had a personality, and we thought Ollie was the best thing that was going to happen. Sadly, COVID came along, and the price point for Ollie was going to be about £500 because of all the technology and all the advances, whereas Alexa came along and Amazon at £30 for their smart speakers. So it killed it off. And this is one of the things that we find with robotics. There's been some great innovation out there. Pepper, as you well know, was around for a number of years and was used in all sorts of research labs, but then sadly has gone. And Jibo is another one that was developed at MIT. Really is a tabletop robot. Fantastic what it could do and what was behind it and the inspiration, but sadly that had to go as well. So one of the problems with people who are developing these, I think, really inspiring robots is that it sometimes is not they don't last and they're not viable. And that's maybe a question I'll ask you later. But I just want to finish off by saying I've been working with a robot called LEQ. And LEQ is developed to try and help older people in care homes or at home when they've been widowed, to try and help them, to encourage them to enjoy life, to do things. And so one of my students we were given a LEQ to work with. She was interested in how older people might use LEQ to keep mentally active, not about loneliness, about mentally active. So we ran some co-design workshops, and we got older people to come along, and they said, I don't want anything like that. It's patronizing. I don't want that kind of robot. And then we got another group, and they said, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. I'd really like one of those. That would help me to keep mentally active. So you can get a diversity of responses. And I would like to, maybe you think about whose voice do you listen to? Do you listen to your own voice? You get so many different voices when you're doing human-centered design and involving people. So certainly we may not want Elon Musk's voice for the future of human-like robots, but it's also quite difficult, I think, sometimes to take on board all of the different voices when we're designing new technology. So I just want to leave you with that thought about how do you take into account all these voices. And I just want to say that I thought what you did was you did take in lots of different voices in your talk from previous Peter Kirstein speakers. And I thought that was wonderful how you interweaved what we've had before and bringing that, it's still very relevant. So thank you again for a wonderful, stimulating talk. And I'm now going to hand back to Vicky to ask you some questions, unless you want to reply to my...
Thanks. I'm still lapelled, so I have a fancy setup. No, I mean, thank you for reminding me how embarrassed most people would be to share their designs. I also was incredibly nervous about doing so. And in fairness, the paper that I wrote did not have the drawings. It was only written. But that's interesting because with those drawings, I thought about using generative AI to create, like some images. And one of my colleagues just looked at me. I thought, I can't draw, I can write. And all of those William Morris prints, most of those are also in the public domain because of their age. And he was like, Katie, you've just written this whole piece on work pleasure. You're really going to use generative AI now to create some pictures. You either hand sketch them or you don't do them at all. I didn't do them at all for the paper, but here I felt it was right to show that. And this thing about the personal, I don't know that we can not do it that way for much longer. The whole point of the talk is kind of what we're designing. It is. We were just talking about this, it is encoding already what we want it to look like or what we think good looks like. There is no universal standard there. So I think it's better to sort of embrace that a little bit and recognize that there's always a little bit of us in the things that we're designing. I have thoughts on the kind of how do we take more voices and whose voices, but perhaps we'll save that for later because I think that's a juicy topic.
Okay, well, sort of on that theme, and before we dive into the questions on Slido, I think it's worth recognising that it's quite difficult to present an image or a vision of the future which is different from that which people assume to be probable. And it's quite brave to present a vision of any discipline, but in this case computer science, which draws from so many other schools of thought and ideas. I wonder if you could reflect slightly on the challenges that maybe you've had to overcome in being able to take and share that position, because I see a lot of people in the room, some of whom I know to be students and PhD students, who perhaps aren't there yet in terms of being able to be on that space in the journey. So would you talk a little bit about how you've overcome some of those challenges of just doing and saying what everybody else does?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Because the short answer is also, Dan mentioned this feminist robotics work that I was involved with. That took 2 to 3 years to do because I really went and studied with the gender studies scholars, and it took real work just to be able to talk the same language and to be in the same space and to show that I wasn't just messing about. They're in the social sciences, they're used to AI researchers having all the money, all the time, all the fancy things. And I come along I want to do feminist robotics. It would have been so easy for them to say take your robots and, whatever, don't take up our time with this. But they didn't. They saw that I was trying to do something and that I was willing to listen, but it really did take 2 to 3 years. So that was a real privilege for my postdoc to have the time to do that. So I guess a key thing is finding time, we, perhaps the more seniors, need to give students and postdocs time, real time, long time. It takes time to do these big things. And that doesn't really work for the typical sort of publish or perish feeling that we might have as PhD students, especially in computer science. So part of the answer is knowing how to dress your research up to make it look kind of what you're supposed to do or kind of make it fit mainstream computer science. And I wish that wasn't the case because now we're back into the cycle of kind of propping up a not good situation. But there is a skill to that. And I think we should also be not purely idealistic. If you can get funding by, not talking so much about your socialist ambitions with your robot and instead pushing that it's going to solve the aging population problem, I think we have to do that sometimes. And that we, again, the seniors need to help the students to write funding applications or to do work that ticks those big boxes while still allowing them to explore the things that are important. Interdisciplinary learning is super, super important. I was really privileged in my PhD to be able to have one of my supervisors was a roboticist, one was an occupational therapist, and one was a psychologist. It's really, really important that we do that. So I guess what I'm saying is I was very lucky. And I think institutionally, where I did my PhD, that was afforded. That's super important.
And brave.
Yeah, I guess it was brave. I think I just thought, to be honest, if you're a PhD student in the UK, it's not the best pay, right? Let's be honest. I'm sure no one will mind me saying. So if you're choosing to do that, you're already being brave and doing something because it's really meaningful to you. Okay. So at that point, it's you sort of may as well do what you're really passionate about or what's really exciting or what's really meaningful to you, because otherwise you could just get a way better job. Or a better paid job, let's say.
I'll ask you a question from the Slido, which is related, and then hand back to Yvonne. This is the most voted for question, but it's kind of on a similar theme. So speculative fiction as a research tool. How can we make this kind of art production a more valued part of CS research? So not so much about the discipline, but the tools.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think so I normally publish in human-robot interaction, which is a very human-computer interaction venue. I wouldn't say it's traditional CS, right? Would you? Yeah, it's already open. Let's say it's already open to those kind of methods. But I think that hopefully talks like what I've done today try to show, okay, this was a big idea, but what I want to talk about now is variable autonomy and the correct type of algorithmic approach to make that happen. Yeah, but I mean really, bring it down, right, and make it into a sort of, what's the technology we've got now and how do we realize that? So I think if we can show that it's not just art, that yes, it's artistic, but there is kind of a trickle down to sort of technologies that we're building, then we can show that it's useful. So I think that that's part of it, that maybe is why it's not fully art, it is actually a piece of work that I did and published. But it's up to us to do that a little bit too. To say, okay, yes, I've given you this big picture and it's funny that I've drawn really badly and stuff, but actually okay, now someone who's an AI expert, please come and talk to me and let's talk about what variable autonomy would look like, or what's the right kind of type of AI to use to achieve such a system. So I think if we can do that bit of work to show that it's not just head in the sky, it's not just kind of big thinking, or it's not just head in the clouds, but we can bring it back down to technical work, then hopefully we can get that. Also, it's fun. To be honest, I think also if we can show it's fun, I think it will help computer science students kind of not feel like the bad guys all the time. I often teach on AI ethics, and I have a horrible feeling that my students go away thinking that they're the worst people in the world ever, because I'm trying to talk about the ills of big tech and the problems. So I think if we can also show that it's valuable not just for the technical, but actually for helping us all remember that a lot of us got into this to build better futures. That was a lot of why we all became technologists in the first place. So we just perhaps need to evidence that a little bit.
Useful and beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Functional and beautiful. Very William Morris. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a nice, easy question.
Okay.
Which is, when we have open days here in the computer science department and we have robots, all the kids come over and they just love them and they get inspired and they want to play with them.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in robots in the first place?
Oh yeah, that is a good question. Yeah, so actually I studied mechanical engineering and there was no robotics at all until the very final year. And it was one lecture in one module. Most of the module was about using MATLAB to program fake drones and understand how drone swarms would work. And there was using a little bit of Lego robots and getting them to find their way through a maze. It was pretty kind of technical or traditional robotics. And there was just one lecture where the professor talked about personal robots and the way that they could kind of influence this kind of psychology stuff. And I was just blown away. I just thought it was so incredible. So I was thinking that I would go into robotics and build exoskeletons and stuff like that. And I was like, that's an obvious thing to do if you're a mechanical engineer. And then when I started the PhD, because luckily at Bristol, we have this amazing Bristol robotics lab. And I thought, okay, then I found out that building the next generation of exoskeletons, the thing that's hard about having robots on the skin at that time was the safety element, and it basically would have translated to doing another 4 years of control engineering, and I was like, I do not want to do that. I want to help people. I want to get robots in the world now. And it became clear that these social robots seemingly had the power to do that. Right now we can put that robot out there and it is influencing people's behavior. I just was blown away by this kind of their persuasive power.
So you weren't blown away by the cute look of Pepper with those big eyes. It was more what you could do with the robots. Or were you inspired by any science fiction at all, or films? Or was it just your course that really got you going? The course started it. I have to say, the course started it. Also realizing that I didn't want to leave university in my 4th year and get a real job. But I watched I took this course and I watched Big Hero 6. I don't know if anyone's seen it, the Disney film. So I have Baymax tattooed on my other arm. William Morris on this arm, Baymax on the other arm.
She's also got a PhD as a tattoo.
So Baymax for me was the epitome. That film is so good at kind of encapsulating a lot of the things that got me into it. It was a healthcare robot then too, so there's no surprise that I went on to do healthcare robots. But Baymax encapsulated so much, not just because of what the robot could do. Okay, spoilers. if you haven't watched the film. The guy who's developing Baymax dies, and his younger brother kind of takes an interest in robotics after meeting this robot that his brother has designed. And for me, the film encapsulates, Baymax is a great healthcare robot. It's really fun. I think it's a very good example of what a good social robot for healthcare would look like. But it's more, the robot is more than just itself. It encapsulates the spirit of the brother, the person who designed it. We talked already about the personal. Like, that robot was the embodiment of the brother's ideas of what good looked like and healthcare looked like, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, Baymax was the one, if I have to choose one. Yeah.
Okay, back to you, Vicky, for that one. Next question.
You may not have noticed, but UCL is 200 years old this year. And we're very proud of being one of the first universities to open our doors to women and also non-Christians. Mm-hmm. And so it's a good moment to ask you, as someone has on Slido, what will the next 200 years look like for robotics?
Wow.
So if you could just sort that out.
Yeah, if I just fix that on my way out.
We'll good.
Yeah. I mean, what I hope it will look like is a lot more of this interdisciplinary thinking, recognizing that there's something very, very special about robots specifically. So I think with Yvonne, it would be fun to argue, like, what's HRI and what's HCI and where But one thing I think about robots especially is, unlike other technologies, they're always 5 years away. At least that was the running gag. When I started my PhD, it was like all the professors were like, robots are always, it's just going to be 5 more years and then they're going to be in your homes. 5 more years and they'll be doing your washing up. 5 more years and so on and so forth. But they are truly like a not quite there yet technology, in a way differently. Computers are here. Designing for interfaces we already have is one thing. So when we design robots, we really are designing the future because those technologies are not quite there yet. I mean, that's my idea. That's why the talk is called so. So I hope that the future of robotics will be actually a much more integrated kind of recognition that as we design robots, and AI as well as part of that, we are designing the society. And so we shouldn't perhaps be starting from the robots, but we should perhaps be starting from what do we want the world to look like in 200 years, and then kind of stepping back to figure out what the robotics needs to look like now to get to that future, if you see what I mean. But for sure, it should be interdisciplinary. That's the biggest thing I've learned. I've been working with gender studies scholars, working with critical scholars, working with people from psychology. Like, it's obvious that we can't solve these problems alone or make those decisions alone. So I really hope it will be a much more interdisciplinary endeavour than we perhaps see now by default. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a slightly more tricky question now, which is, if social robots are only affordable to wealthier people, so some of these human-like robots that are coming out are going to be costing $10,000s of pounds or dollars, are we automating inequality from the start? Should affordability be a core design requirement? That's obviously yes.
Yes.
The first part of the question.
Yeah, no, it's really a problem. And I think the other problem here that I've been worried about lately is, you mentioned that Pepper was used by a lot of labs. I'm like, we've done a lot of research based on the affordances of that specific robot. We're again in the kind of we can so we should category. Like, oh, Pepper has these nice eyes that you referred to. So maybe I should do a study to understand, like, what type of eye blinking is the best one to make the robot as likable as possible. We're actually doing research based on what the robots can do, which again seems to me a little bit back to front. Like, shouldn't we be designing the robots based on what we think the needs of the problem are? That sounds so sensible to say. But I think it is an issue that we're actually dealing, and it's always going to be a back and forth, right? We can't just come up with robots from nowhere, so it's really good that we have an existing robots from nowhere. We can't just kind of create something from nothing. So it's great that we have a robot like Pepper to do the work with, to some work, but we can't just then continue. We need to go back. Okay, was Pepper the right robot for the job? Super expensive, probably is only a research prototype, and make sure we bring it back to, okay, if I wanted to now design a small, open source, more affordable robot, what lessons can I learn from the work that we've done with Pepper to make sure that we don't get stuck in exactly that cycle, where we've done all this work and knowledge generation around a super expensive platform that isn't going to make it into the real world. So yeah.
What about the Roomba, which now is at a price point that most people can afford? It's about the price of buying a pizza oven or something like that. And many people now have a Roomba, although they're called something else now because that company sold it on. And even though even you have bought one, have one. So do you think in the future maybe in 200 years that they will be affordable by everyone as the price comes down, or will they be still just within the realm of those who can afford them?
I think, they should be affordable because I think we should stick to building sort of robots for one job. I actually don't believe in the whole idea of one humanoid that's going to do all the chores in your house. I'm not really convinced that that's ever going to be affordable or cost effective unless we really sort of, as I said, twist the world to make it so. So I think actually it should be affordable because I'm more a proponent of my dishwasher is one job, my washing machine is another job, and maybe that actually if we're sort of keeping things small like that actually there's no reason for them to be hyper expensive. So yeah. I think so, but my 200 years would be the communist utopia where there's no profit anyway. So then maybe things are different again. I think it should be more affordable if we go that way.
I'm going to hand back to Vicky, and then I think we might open it to the floor, the audience here.
Okay, so the question that's coming through quite a lot is thinking about new technologies tend to go through a process of embedding in society first as liberating tools, but often they embed the existing structures of power, which is what you've talked about. And we're going through a cycle right now with AI that potentially could be described in that way. Mm-hmm. And the questioner then asks, how could people in this room influence that trajectory towards the cone of the preferable? And I think I wanted to sort of add a bit more, which is, and if so many of us continue to do our work or our jobs without really knowing what part of that cone we're in. Yeah. So I guess, what's your advice, quite practically, not theoretically, for us all in terms of being active participants and agents in the future that we want to see, whether they agree with yours or not? Yeah.
I find the futures cone helpful for this. I think it's okay that perhaps if you've got a portfolio of work, you literally have a little futures cone at the beginning of each one. So right now I'm here on the cone. Right now this piece of work is about tackling this problem of today.
I'm assuming X, Y, Z.
I'm assuming X, Y, and Z. And now, this piece of work, I'm actually out here in the really improbable part and sort of being a little bit more open about that, because then it's a bit just being honest about where you're at, about your positionality a little bit. So I think that's a practical thing we can do first to just sort of show that's the future. We're working on this kind of trajectory. A bit. We talk about technological readiness levels when we think about kind of what we're building. So something akin to that, I guess. But so that's, I think, how we can practically show, and also even if we don't show anyone, just reflecting for yourself. Okay. Maybe as a nice exercise, even if you're building something that you think is very, very non-user facing, what is the system that this bit of kit fits into? Who uses that system? This is pretty basic HCI stuff, right? Exploring user personas. But maybe it's not just a user persona. Maybe you sketch out a whole day or a week, or what's the government in that world that you think you're designing for? I think that might feel a bit silly to do that at first because you're not used to it. But if you just no one has to see it, you don't have to give a really public talk where you show everyone your drawings like I did. But just doing that as an exercise for yourself, what world do I think that this bit of kit affords? And then, is that what I want? And if not, what small tweaks can I do? You mentioned earlier about PhD students and postdocs. It's really important that we recognize not all of us have the same power to affect change. I've tried to show that we all have some power, but we have to recognize it's not the same for everybody. But maybe a PhD student can, change their evaluation metric a little bit, or just change their sampling method a little bit, or just change, as I said, if you're coming up with a dummy scenario just to test your system, think really hard what that dummy scenario is and what it says about the potential world that would exist. That's some ideas, perhaps.
Thank you.
We have lots and lots of questions on Slido, but I would actually like to open questions to the floor because I think you're sitting here patiently. Some of you have put them on Slido, and it would be very good to actually have your voice rather than us presenting. So we have 2 mic roamers. If you'd like to put your hand up, anyone in the floor who would like to ask a question or to ask the question they put in Slido, I think that would be great. Thank you. We have one. If you could just run a bit faster.
And on the previous question, Yvonne's written a book about that.
First of all, thank you so much for your talk. It's been so insightful. I love it, and love your drawings as well.
Thanks.
You mentioned earlier that you should write proposals in a specific way, and going back to earlier on when you mentioned about big tech and how they're kind of almost winning this race in imagination, I was wondering, what do you propose that what measures should be implemented in academia so that imagination is kind of what we strive for, and given that often ideas are limited by things like, allowance, having the permission to do it, time and funding, what sort of implementations do you think should take place?
Thank you for the question. So I think if we think about in academia in the educational side, I think people like me, people who are lecturing, people who are designing courses, need to build that into our courses, right? That legitimize that as practice. So I teach advanced interaction design in Uppsala, and in there I can actually do that, right? I can kind of say, right, as one of the assignments my students have to do is go away and write a design fiction and actually do that. I mean, we got talked earlier about showing that the tools yield something. So they actually write a design fiction about their peers' work and then use that design fiction to critique in a nice way their peers' work and the way it could be improved, technically improved. So partly it's about building it into, and I mean this really goes to that question earlier, showing that it's a useful tool for computing science students and practitioners. So I think that's part of the thing that we should do. Not everyone, it needs to be in the right courses for the right type of work, but I think that that's a thing that we can do. Then you mentioned about funding. I'm still pretty junior. I'm an assistant professor. I really hope I'll make promotion next year and become, next year or the year after, become an associate professor and more permanent. But it's up to people who go up the career ladder, like me, to start trying to enact these changes in the bigger structures that we're part of. So a really concrete example of that is I'm on the organising committee of the Human-Robot Interaction Conference. And for the last few years, I've been the lead of the theory and methods track. It sounds super boring, and it is hard work. It's a lot of work to... it's not actually boring. It's a lot of work, but not boring. It's a lot of work to go through all the papers, but it's a real position of power because I get to influence what do I think theory and methods for my field looks like. And if I'm in the room, then I'm sitting there advocating for the slightly oddball papers that perhaps don't look like what my colleagues are used to seeing as a normal contribution to the conference. And it's really easy to say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because it's hard work that isn't always built into my working time. I mean, it's an international conference. We did all of this on Zoom, trying to cater for worldwide time zones. I was taking meetings at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. It's not really ideal. But if I'd have given that up, who was going to be in the room advocating for those papers, sort of thing? So all of us need to kind of take steps to legitimize these different things in the places that we can, whether it's in the classroom, at our conferences. Maybe one day I'll be asked to review funding proposals. That's a normal thing that higher up professors have to do. And then my job would be to try to make sure I again say, yeah, it's okay that this person wants to do this thing that's worth giving money to. So wherever we are on the spectrum, we need to find ways to try to do that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the floor? One over here, if you could take the mic and...
While you're getting the mic to this, it's there, is it? Perfect.
Thank you for
James.
running.
Good job.
Hey, nice to meet you. I just want to get your opinion on something. So I just want to see if, will we ever think there will be a limit to the imagination of people as AI progresses? Because I'm still in school, and I'm seeing students they use AI for literally everything, even small questions. Yeah. And to be fair, I've used it once or twice, so I can't really. But do you ever think there will actually be a limit where people will stop, there'll be less creativity, and meaning they will have to. The only thing they'll look forward to is these big tech companies, who will probably put how do you say this, like a standard.
Yeah.
A standard in which how AI should be, or like how the future of robotics should be,
Yeah.
in which creativity is limited. So do you ever think there will be a time where imagination will be limited, even though AI is a good thing,
Yeah.
it will limit the creativity?
That's a great question. Are you going to come and study robotics at UCL? We hope to see you soon.
Yeah, well, an excellent question. Yeah, I'm terrified of that happening, genuinely. Like, I really want to buy into the idea that generative AI as we have it right now can be a good brainstorming partner, but I'm not super convinced yet. I don't think we're educated enough yet on how to use it to keep it in an imagination opening space, because it is, as you're exactly pointing to, it is already encapsulating somebody's idea of what good looks like. It's trawled the internet, right? It's got already its ideas. I am worried that we are not yet good enough at like resisting the temptation. I think it's very honest that, I mean, like you admit yourself, right? It's too easy to use it. And it's also, like a lot of the models at the moment are very good at like convincing you that you've had a great idea without necessarily probing that critical reflection. So yes, I am worried about that. And I think the key, but at the same time, it's not going to be useful to just be like, well, don't use AI then. It's too pervasive. So I think the key is working out with AI experts, with designers, with HCI people, how we make sure we either contain it and really remind students why. I didn't set that homework just to be annoying, right? I set that homework because I thought that if you did it, you would take something from it. And if you put that through AI, you're probably not going to get that. My concern is that if students are using it as much as you're kind of saying, I also see that in my students at the university, like they perhaps need reminding why they're there in the first place. Like, and if they're not convinced, then we've also done something wrong. Like if they think that what's more important is putting it through AI in order to just like pass an exam, then that's a real that they obviously don't understand why we're trying to educate them in the first place. So yes, I am worried about that, and I hope that we can overcome it by critical AI education, thinking skills, learning to use AI as a tool, and recognizing where it isn't appropriate.
It's all right, just to follow up on that. Do you think that there should be limits on how students can use AI in general?
Thanks.
Yes. It's probably the short answer, yeah.
And there's a question in here which kind of relates. It's from a student. I'm 17. I'm considering what to do at university. Should I go for pure computer science? Should I take a model in this, that, the other? I think it relates to your point about critical thinking and kind of how that's embedded in what we teach. But what would you recommend a really interested, bright 17-year-old follows if they want to take a sort of dynamic, challenging career like you have?
Absolutely, as broad as you can, right? Like really, if you can take, if you can do your A-levels and it happens that you can take philosophy and ethics as well as doing physics, do it. Like really take the breadth at every opportunity. When I was studying for my A-levels, it was like you couldn't study physics. I'm sore about this, clearly, because it's the very specific example I have. If you wanted to study physics, you couldn't also study philosophy at my school. It happened that those two subjects were going to be timetabled at the same time. And I think that's really sad. I understand why it was that way, but that was very sad. So I think my advice is, if you know you want to be a computer scientist, great, pick the subjects you have to pick, but in all the wiggle room you've got, pick something completely different, pick art, pick music, pick cooking, whatever it is, just try to keep that breadth to keep yourself as diverse as possible.
Because the geniuses, like William Morris and like David Bowie, who was not just an amazing musician but also a mime artist and invented what might be a very early program to design computer lyrics, I think, are across a multiple breadth of knowledge and understanding. It's true. Do you want to do one?
Sure. There are several of us in computer science department here who've tried to inspire young girls to take up computer science. And we've done all sorts of things and trying to show them the excitement of what you can do. And it's not all boys stuff. There's a question here which is, how would you inspire and encourage young girls to pursue interests in not just computer science but also STEM? And would it be by introducing robots? And if so, what kind of robots would you introduce to young girls to get them on board? You certainly perhaps wouldn't want to introduce them to domestic robots that do the washing up.
Yeah. I think that that's actually that point you've made is actually one I would question a little bit, in the sense of like, of course, I don't want to say, okay, right, encouraging girls, here's a Barbie robot, because it kind of reinforces like what it is to be girly. But at the same time, if girls like Barbies, maybe there should be a robot Barbie. So I think there's something about like meeting girls where they're at, and perhaps we should like, when I was talking to a colleague about this, colleague Madeline Ballum at KTH, she's incredible, and she was like, no one wants to build a makeup robot, or no one wants to use AI to teach people to have their makeup on, because everyone is scared of going, oh, but women's stereotypes and kind of pink washing and all of this sort of stuff. And I'm like, actually, her point was kind of, if you want to encourage girls, maybe we do need to do a bit of that. Maybe we need to show that, as I said, if AI can play chess, why shouldn't it also help me pick out an outfit? Or why shouldn't it also do these things that we've traditionally ascribed femininity to?
But girls play chess.
Yeah, I know. But it's what I guess that's, yeah, true.
So, and boys cook, and I think...
But we don't have cooking robots. That's kind of the point. And it is a stereotypically feminine
Oh, there are robots
activity.
that will cook for you.
Yeah, okay.
They'll do burgers and things like that.
Yeah.
Are they expensive? Any more questions from the floor? Yes, let's take this woman here. I'm assuming your gender, apologies. This person here.
Thank you. My name's Kushi. I've just completed my computer science bachelor's.
Well done.
And I'm trying to go into robotics. So, as a theme that your talk has had, that, we want to create a world where if we're integrating robotics, we want to include the opinions of almost like as many people as we can. So, but there is a lack of knowledge about robotics, about the kinds of work that's being done in the field. So what do you suggest in terms of how can we keep up with that knowledge? How can we learn about this, even if it's not just as a student, but even the general public can? A lot of people will not have the idea that, there was a Pippa as a robot that was doing healthcare, or even, it's only that those, the cooking robots, or, some of the robots, like the running robot that was recently in Japan, that are famous because they're being covered by the media. But how can we keep up with, advancements in the industry and in the technology? Thank you.
It's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, reading the news is part of it, which sounds silly, but like reading the actual news and not just asking ChatGPT, like what happened this morning or something. Yeah, I don't know really, like trying to keep, talks like this are really important. I was so happy to be asked to give the talk, mostly because it's a broad audience, like it's open to the general public, right? It's not just academics, it's not just the faculty. And that's, I think, really important. So we have a responsibility. Your question almost can be flipped. I don't know that it's on you as a person. You need to check the news, you need to seek out information, but we also have a responsibility as roboticists, as engineers, as developers, to make sure we are engaging with the media so that they can write about what we're doing. But I think, practically just go to events like this, follow, you can look at most academic articles are open access, so have a look at find researchers who you think you like their work and keep tabs on what they're doing. But beyond that, it's difficult. The main thing is engage your critical thinking and find sources of information that kind of are keeping you up to date with what you want to follow.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your answer. Also, just kind of follow on, where can we, also questions have been asked about this before, where can we limit the use of AI in research? Because I was doing my dissertation this time last year, and almost most of my resources were coming through AI because it was something I've never done before. So where can I limit? Because of research, finding a research.
I will stop you there because you have had a question, if that's all right. So where can we limit AI in research? We have touched on that already. Do you want to add to anything? And then I've got a question.
I think a key thing is really working out where does that use of AI not take away from your mastery of the work? So find ways to use AI that is, okay, what you get out of it, you still feel it's yours, you're still proud of it, you still feel like you did the thing, whatever the thing is. And I think that's something that you can do as an individual, but again, something we need to actually educate students
When
better.
is it still work pleasure?
So that it's still work pleasure, exactly.
My last question, and then I'll hand to you. I was lucky enough to do this with Hugh Hare from MIT Media Lab 2 years ago, and I asked him this question at the end, and I'm going to ask you too.
Okay.
So obviously Peter's family are here, and Peter has this enormous and huge legacy of driving massive change in his lifetime. What would you like your legacy to be?
I really hope my legacy would be something about recognizing that we aren't just building technology. This has been said before many times, but like recognizing the joy in what we do, like really this work pleasure, like designing for joy again, not just designing for efficiency, for productivity, and recognizing that to design is joyful, to build technology is joyful. There is still hope if we can reclaim a little bit of that power. So I really hope that the legacy would be, yes, policy is important. Yes, the funding is important, but we technologists also have power, and we should just design for joy a bit more.
Hope is a thing with feathers.
I couldn't agree more. We should design for joy and playfulness and cheekiness and curiosity and all of the things that make us human. But often robots are being designed to help us to do our domestic chores or to make our life easier or more efficient. My last question is one that I've pondered over for a number of years, is how human-like should robots be designed to be? Should we design them to be more like systems or you know, things that just do things on our behalf? For example, like in manufacturing, where they are designed to do a particular function and it's not really what they look like. Whereas for domestic social robots, there's this ongoing debate about whether they should be more human-like in their personality, in the skin they have, in their emotions, in their empathy, all of these things. So how human-like do you think they should be?
Yeah, it's the big
question,
right? As a social roboticist, surprisingly, I actually am not very pro the very human-like stuff. I'm not really sure I'm convinced on the practical application of it or the need for it. I think that even if you have something, like you talk about manufacturing cases, people still can often treat them like their buddy. There is still a very social connection there. So we need to be aware of what's more important really is less how the robot looks and more the social relation it takes to the user. It's more about, for me, I'm more worried about the bond that the user is kind of getting to that robot, regardless of whether it's human or not. So I don't think humanoid robots or very, very human-like are particularly useful. I think that there maybe are some use cases where a face can be nice, but I'm not sure I've seen a real compelling case for these very, very human-like ones. And it doesn't get there's also no need in that if you're interested in the social psychology, that's happening already with the more machine-like ones. So I'm not a big proponent of very, very human-like ones. I use them in my research, and then I'm definitely falling into the trap of it's there, so we should understand the impact it has on people. So I think we need to understand that a bit, but I'm not sure.
Do you find them creepy when they're human-like?
I think less creepy and more just underwhelming is the problem. We create these, like the fur hat, it is a fantastic system, it can do great things, but if you're gonna make something look like a person, you better be ready for the disappointment that follows when it fails to live up to that. So less creepy and more just typically a bit underwhelming, I would say.
Let's see what Elon Musk does with his human-like robots that will be coming out at the end of this year.
Yeah.
I think I'll hand over to you to finish off, or...
Yeah, I can do that. I think, have we one more question time, or are we done? 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, well, maybe we'll just finish then with a little bit of a kind of reflection on where we are. And I think there's quite a few questions that have come in about, how do we manage AI? How do we deal with this difficult program? How do we talk about agency in an age of tech giants? How do we, construct our worlds when we live in a university environment that has its own incentives? What gives you reason for hope?
Partly what gives me reason for hope is I see a generation of academics, people working in industry who just aren't going to stand for that anymore. Right. Like really, I think about people who are doing their PhD at the same time as me who've gone into industry. We've seen walkouts at Google. We've seen walkouts at the big companies. I've got colleagues who aren't willing to enter into publish or perish, but it takes a bit of a collective notion to do that. So I think what gives me hope is I see that computer science students are coming through, they still want to make the world better, they still have creative, they are my students, at least when I pitch this stuff, they're excited about that. They want to imagine different futures. They want to understand how to think differently. You know, as I said, most people who get into computer science, I don't think I've ever met anyone who set out to be an evil genius, right? Most of them do this in order to make the world better. So I think the hope is that there seems to be, it is more discussed also, these ideas about making sure that we're having equitable systems, you know, work like yours. You are pushing that narrative and it's becoming more understood, at least to some extent. Maybe not enough, but at least it's getting more airtime and recognised at least a bit more. So I'm hopeful.
Well, you give me hope.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone
you so
else? She's given you hope today? Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panel and audience, for all of your insightful questions. It was really nice to have this extra bit of time to reflect, I think, on the talk and, yeah, just get some discussion going. Huge questions, obviously, in this area still to answer, but, you know, actually it really felt like there's some shared thinking emerging, which was nice to see. So I'm going to bring this to a close. Save your applause just for a minute, because I do have some wonderful bags of UCL memorabilia to hand out here. First of all, I'm going to give this to the panel members. Yours is coming, Katie. This is actually for you, Yvonne. Thank you. And a round of applause for Yvonne for sharing there. One for you, Vicky. Thank you very much for chairing there. And of course, the star of the show today. You get 2 bags, actually, but only one of them's for you. Thank you very much, Katie. It's been a great pleasure having you. Yeah. And this one is who we really wanted. This is for little Edith. And yeah, it was a great honour to have her here with you. And so thank you, everybody. Thanks for sticking to the end, for coming along. We do have some nice drinks and nibbles and things where it's back downstairs. So it's either out there or you can go out the ones at the back and down the stairs. Do join us for further inspiring conversations. Thanks again for coming.